So I watched my other video after my birth chart reading. I have no idea. I have no recollection of recording that. And I look pretty sleepy drunk. You know, they say that being exhausted is exactly and or possibly worse than driving drunk. If you're driving sleep deprived, it's worse than driving drunk. And that was my sleepy drunkenness talking, because I don't remember saying any of that. But I just wanted to correct that, in that I re-listened and rewatched the recording of my birth chart reading, and I actually will be showing and sharing a part of that with you guys, just so that you can see how amazing she is, and just how helpful it was to have her spend the time explaining that chart for me, because I'm very visual, and when I look at something like this by itself, it scares me. It's a lot of math. It looks like it's a lot of math. It's a lot of symbols that I am not familiar with, but so I will be sharing a part of it. I won't be sharing all of it. And again, I still want to honor the details of what I'm going through, and the individuals, rather. I want to honor the individuals. But I think it was really interesting, and why I resonate with Libra so much, in terms of just the position of the major planets, and not just the major planets, but I guess what they mean. So I'm definitely learning more as I continuously, hear it over and over again, and I'm really, really excited about that. Yeah. So her link is below. Totally recommend her. Totally worth it. She's amazing. So hope you guys enjoy. Hi.
Hi, how are you?
Good, how are you? It's nice to meet you.
I meet you as well. How are you doing today?
I'm good.
Good. It's a very sensitive day. Mercury just went into Scorpio, so it's like heavy, deep feelings.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I don't usually work with visuals when I do readings, because sometimes I found in the past it can be a little distracting, but since you asked for that, I was thinking I'd bring up your chart.
Okay.
Try to bring it up on the screen so we could sort of go through it.
Yes. And you're okay with me recording, right? I just wanted to make sure.
Yeah,
okay.
For sure.
Thank you.
How did you get connected to me, by the way, if you don't mind me asking?
Remy? Yeah. He recommended you, so so that was, it was nice to have a recommendation of someone I really trust. So yeah, you were highly recommended.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I just saw him on Sunday, so that's so funny. Well, wonderful. Yeah. So, okay. I was thinking, since you requested it, and also because I can very clearly see from your chart that, like, breaking it down into the components might be helpful for you, I'm going to stop the video and bring up your chart.
Okay.
And I'll just sort of like give you a quick overview of what I'm looking at and sort of what I'm breaking down so that you can sort of like get your bearings, and then we'll dive in a little bit. Okay?
Thank you.
Okay. So, okay. So are you able to see that okay?
Yes.
Okay. And can you see my cursor moving around?
Yes.
Okay, cool. You can tell I'm not like a Zoom expert over here, so. Okay, so this is your birth chart. And basically, there's 3 elements to the chart. There's the sign, the house, and the planet. And the planets are basically the actors of the zodiac. They sort of create the action. They are the ones that trigger events and trigger all sorts of things coming in and out of our lives. Okay. The signs, they sort of denote the quality of that part of your life. So each sign has a sort of specific flavor, and they have specific qualities that they'll sort of impose on the part of your life that they rule.
Okay.
And then you can see in these there's 12 sections that are numbered 1, 2, 3, 4 all around the wheel.
Uh-huh.
These are called houses. And what they tell us is the area of life that a sign rules. These are the signs on the outside here.
Okay.
And the planets are these little symbols in the middle, inside the pie. And so the signs, they tell us what part of life, the houses tell us what part of life the signs rule. So house number 1, that's the identity in the body. It's like the most active part of the chart, tells us most specifically about who you are and how you are going to present into the world. And the planets in the first house exert quite a bit of influence over how we move through the world and how we engage on a daily basis.
Okay.
House 2 has to do with money and resources. The third house is like community, close friends, communication, writing, basically the immediate world that we interact with, along with our siblings. So everything like that the world create, like the immediate environment and how we interact with it on a daily basis.
Okay.
The 4th house is home and parents, where we live, our root system. This is sort of romance. 5 is romance, pleasure, creativity. 6 is work. And just because you don't have a planet there doesn't mean that part of your life is empty. Each sign has a ruler, so there's all sorts of information about each house that I could pull, whether or not there's a planet there. So don't freak out.
I'm like, no.
6th house is work, and basically things that we don't really like to do but have to do, essentially. So there's a sort of duality, right? You go from pleasure into work. It can also be illness, some things that we have to deal with, like to take care of ourselves, basically.
Okay.
The 7th house is partnership, marriage, and also work partners. So anyone that we like co-create anything with, basically. The 8th house is a house of co-managed finances, co-managed projects, and death.
Okay.
Just sort of it's a very mysterious house, but basically the astrological underpinnings of that is like our bodies are a borrowed resource that we share. So that rules death. And then here we have the 9th house, which is very important for you. And the 9th house is the house of the worldview. So all the activities that feed into the way we understand and view the world. So the activities in the 9th house are education, they are writing, travel, adventure, everything that's sort of out looking. So we'll talk about this in your chart a little when we get really specific into you, because if you can see here, you have a stellium of very important planets in the ninth house. You have your Sun, Venus, and Mercury. So the ninth house is a really important house. It has to be sort of disentangled for you. So I'm going to point out the polarity here of the ninth and the third. They oppose each other.
Okay.
This is sort of the immediate environment, but it's also the childhood worldview. So the things that you learn from your immediate environment. The ninth house is everything that's like pushing out into the world. Everything that's asking us, like, what does this mean? What do I believe? How do I understand the world around me? Does that kind of make sense?
Yes.
Okay. And so the 10th house, this is career and reputation, life's work, essentially. The 11th house is friendships, professional networks, audience. So basically, anybody in your life who can sort of provide you resources and access. And the 12th house is our internal space. It's often called the house of undoing. So it can be a place of like the mind and the soul and the internal space. It can be a negative place of isolation and fear, and it can also be a positive place of like detaching from the material world for spiritual benefit. So yeah, that is sort of the starting place. So that's the wheel. Okay. And that's what I'm going to be referring to as I discuss your chart.
Okay.
And so, do you have any questions before we get started, or would you like me to just dive in?
Yeah, just dive in. This is all new to me.
Yeah. Have you ever had your chart read before?
No, this is all new. I've heard the term North Node, but and South Node, and that's about it.
Oh wow, how interesting that those are the terms that you've heard. Yeah, the North Node, I refer to him as K2. He's right here in your chart. Excuse me, Rahu. He's the head of the dragon. He represents material desire and drive. Okay. And then his little counterpart, you don't see him here, but he's right here. He's K2. He's the tail of the dragon.
Okay.
So we're actually going to talk about those.
Oh, good.
as we go forward.
Okay.
But so I want to, do you want to stay in this mode? Is this helpful to you, or would you rather me bring it back so it's just us talking?
It is helpful, actually. Very helpful.
Okay,
that's
great.
Okay.
We'll stay here then.
Okay.
Okay. So this house, the first house, like I said, this is sort of like identity, body, to some extent personality, the way that we present to the world. It's always in a conversation with your sun right here, wherever the sun is in your chart. So this house we call the first house, or the rising, the ascendant, are all words we use to describe it. Okay. It's basically the house that's coming up over the sign that's coming up over the horizon when you're born.
Okay.
So it sort of marks you with a lot of its qualities. And then that rising sign gets balanced out by the sun, which is the internal identity, the soul, the sort of like who we really are on the inside, and sort of where we're moving toward in life. So the first house and the sun, they sort of speak to our personality, like our holistic identity and personality. So the first thing that I noticed when I looked at your chart is that you have your rising sign and your sun both in air signs. So the rising sign over here is in Libra. And Libra is sort of a sign of, it's a sign that's ruled by Venus. And it's the scales of the zodiac. So it's basically a sign that tries to move us into harmony with other people. it's a sign that's really interested in finding balance, and finding agreement, harmony, but also aesthetic beauty, and also sort of like justice. So we have all of these like harmony and justice themes with Libra. And so oftentimes Libra rising folks tend to be drawn to these themes, tend to be drawn to beauty, tend to be drawn toward harmony. But it's also an air sign, so it's a very intellectual sign. It's a sign that sort of like operates through the mode of the intellect, more than necessarily the mode of the physicality, and it tends to be a sign that prioritizes relationship over the self necessarily. So it can be a sign that's always looking for, what does this other person, or what do these people, or what does this group of people need, and how do I figure into that?
Okay.
So I don't know if you want to speak to that, your experience of
that. Totally makes sense. Yeah, that totally makes sense. It's been a very service above self type of world for me from day one.
Yeah, it is a very idealistic sign to a certain extent, and I think the difficulty that sometimes Libras can experience is the sort of tendency to give themselves up a little bit too much in service of other people or other ideals.
Yeah.
Wow. So if you can see here, you have this sort of blue line that's going from Jupiter and Saturn, who we'll talk about in a minute, straight over to your sun. So there's this, these blue lines are harmonious interactions, and they create a certain flow. So it means that the planets, they're sort of talking to each other in a synergistic way. And so here you have your sun in Gemini, another air sign. And again, another sign that operates very much on an intellectual level. And so Gemini is the sign that is sort of playing into this, like, I'm a visual learner. I want to understand all of the components. Gemini is the twins. And so sometimes he gets this reputation for having multiple faces, which I think is a little bit of a distraction from what Gemini is really represents. Gemini really represents that investigation of a whole through its parts. So Gemini wants to understand every detail and how those details can be split and understood in their component pieces and then put back together in various ways. So how can I disassemble this thing, this culture, this piece of machinery, this whatever it is, and then reassemble it to be more efficient, to be better, to be sort of like a higher manifestation of what it could be. Gemini is also extraordinarily social and enjoys social interaction, and it's a sign that it's comfortable, sort of comfortable with words, typically comfortable with ideas, comfortable with concepts, a little bit less comfortable with emotions. Again, a little bit less comfortable with the physical stuff of life, more comfortable up here. So how does that feel with
it's just to the T. It's to the T. Yeah.
Are you someone who's been in school quite a bit in your life? Like, do you have higher education?
Yeah, I have a graduate degree in social work.
There you go.
Yeah.
Okay.
And everything you're saying is resonating
Okay, cool. And
Loudly.
please feel free to interrupt me at absolutely any time to ask questions or to jump in and add detail, because then I'll be able to sort of pull even more
Okay.
out of what we're talking about.
Okay.
So basically, if we can keep in mind this Libra foundation of like the seeking of justice, of self over or others over self, harmony, and then Gemini, which is this like very brainy, very intellectual, very component pieces. This is sort of the foundation of a lot of what's holding up your chart, essentially. This rising sign and this sun. And everything sort of plays out within the context of those issues. Your moon is really important too. I'm going to hold off on getting into that because I feel like the moon is sort of taking us in a little bit of a different direction. And I want to sort of fill out what's happening over here and here with these other planets so that we can chat about that.
Okay.
Because the other, and maybe I'll just ask you directly. So you have a degree in social work, but do you feel to some extent like you have you had a hard time sort of like figuring out what direction you want to go with that, or like always knowing exactly where? Do you feel like
I feel like I stumbled into it, to be honest with you. I was supposed to be a teacher. Around the time I did everything undergrad to become a teacher, and when I needed to get into my credential program was when all of the teachers were having a hard time finding jobs. So I had to make a quick shift. All the schools were closed, and it was literally the social work program that kind of, I was drawn to it in the sense of advocacy. Well, this particular school, the way that they describe social work, I didn't know a lot about social work aside from your typical child protective service worker. And I knew I didn't want to go into that field, but the way they described social work, it seemed like it was a lot more broader, and there was a lot of values that I felt that resonated with me, and I just kind of jumped in. That was the first time I deviated from a plan, because I was very like plan oriented, followed through with this, and I took a risk, jumped in, and that I think that those 3 years that I was in that graduate, I grew the most. I think I wasn't very social growing up, but I also have a lot of history with trauma. And so in my family, and so I was always described as the one, like the observer. I wasn't very social growing up. My mom worried about me because she said I was always content just sitting on the couch with my notebook, writing and reading. I always struggled making friends, and it wasn't until graduate school where because I pushed myself through something difficult, where I started opening up. High school, there were certain times where I would push myself too, and it seemed like I was social, but I was always very, I liked my alone time. I really liked my alone time, my thinking time, and I felt like I always needed a balance. Now it's the same. I recently feel like I've been going through a spiritual awakening, which kind of prompted all of this. I ended up with the social work degree. I didn't want to go into mental health because I had my own issues to deal with growing up. But that was the only type of job that was available, and I needed to pay my bills. So I jumped in. It was very difficult. And 13 years later, I'm still in mental health. I'm really good at it. I am a supervisor right now, but it just so happened to coincide my promotion with this spiritual awakening, with a lot of losses that kind of triggered I guess all of this that's been going on, that's been throwing me for a loop. Once I feel like I'm over the hump, it just
keeps coming.
Yeah, and it's been, last month was a super heavy month. September was too. It feels like it's been so fast, and at the same time, I realize I'm like, it's only been a few months, but it just, everything that's gone on, like my memory is kind of like fuzzy in terms of time. So I've been struggling a lot with work.
in this position specifically. And I feel a little lost, to be quite honest with you. I feel a little lost right now.
Yeah. Okay. I'm gonna just bring us a little closer.
That's fine.
And I just want to tell you that I'm not watching the clock, so I wanna pull you back to present for a second and get you out of the mental game of chart, because what I'm hearing is that you could maybe use a little context for what's going on right now and sort of a little bit of understanding around when it might start to let up a little bit.
Okay.
And so I did notice when I looked at your chart that you are getting hit pretty hard in your fourth house right now. Fourth house has to do with your roots, your home, parents, family. So that interacts with your career life. It's sort of, they ping back and forth. So you have your 10th house up at the top and your 4th house down below. And so what's happened this year is that we're in a really, this is a really difficult year astrologically, obviously. It's pretty much maybe the worst year a lot of us have lived through. And so what happened this year is there was a conjunction of Saturn and Pluto in the sky, and that basically creates global trauma every time that it's ever really happened. We're talking World War I, Stalin taking over the Eastern Bloc. We're talking about the AIDS epidemic. Like these, it brings up really similar themes in the globe every time it happens. And for us personally, it all hits our charts in a different place. And, some of us escape the worst of it, and some of us get hit really hard. And it's happening in a very active place in your chart. So anytime a difficult transit hits our angles, which are the first house, the 7th, the 10th, and the 4th, that's sort of like the cross that bears the load of a lot of our life. And so anytime a transit like that hits our angles, it can really rip through our whole life for a period of time. And it's sort of attacked your root system a little bit. And it's been pulling in your moon. And you already have a difficult configuration between your moon and Pluto, which means that your relationship with Pluto is already a struggle. So I just want you to know that this has been in play for about 3 years, and this year has been the most difficult part of it. And at the end of this year, it lets up. I mean, everything's not going to be over, it's not going to end. All our problems are going to go away, but we're going to be able to start really rebuilding, and start sort of like putting the pieces back together.